The sun beat down on the Coronado Amphitheater, but the heat coming off my father was worse. Richard was in his element, holding court with a group of parents we barely knew. His voice pitched just loud enough to ensure everyone within a 30-foot radius could hear his favorite punchline. Me. He pointed a finger in my direction, not even bothering to look me in the eye. She dropped out of the Navy, he announced, shaking his head with a theatrical sigh. Couldn't handle the discipline. You know how it is. Some kids are built for service, like my Tyler here. And some. He gestured vaguely at my plain civilian dress. Some end up handling logistics for a trucking company. But hey, failure runs out in the wash, right? He smiled that wide, pitiable smile he perfected years ago, the one that demanded sympathy for him and scorn for me. I didn't flinch. I stood stone still, checking my watch, while my brother Tyler, resplendent in his dress whites, stared intently at a spot on the pavement, silent. Before I tell you what happened when the 4-star general walked off the stage and stood directly in front of me, drop a comment. Where are you watching from right now? I want to see how far this story travels. I checked my watch again. Not because I was impatient, but because timing is the only thing that separates a successful operation from a casualty report. Richard took my silence for submission. He thought he was looking at a beaten dog, a 42-year-old woman who had washed out of basic training 2 decades ago and never recovered. He saw a disappointment. I saw a target package. My name is Bella. I am a Rear Admiral in the United States Navy and the current Director of Naval Intelligence. I didn't drop out. I was recruited. My failure was a cover story constructed 20 years ago to let me vanish into the kind of rooms that don't have windows or names. While Richard was telling his friends I couldn't handle the yelling, I was coordinating extraction teams in hostile territories. While he was mocking my trucking logistics job, I was moving assets that cost more than the entire state of California. But Richard didn't know that. And that ignorance was the only reason he was still standing. He leaned in close, his breath hot and smelling of stale coffee. Smile, Bella, he hissed, his voice dropping so the other parents couldn't hear the venom. You owe me this. You owe me for 18 years of housing and the tuition you flushed down the toilet. $250,000, Bella. That's the tab. And until you pay it back, you stand there and you let me speak. The $250,000 lie. It was his favorite weapon. For years, he had held this imaginary debt over my head, claiming that my quitting had ruined his financial future. He threatened that if I didn't fall in line, if I didn't pay his mortgage, he would call my boss at the trucking company and tell them what a flake I was. He thought he held the keys to my livelihood. The irony was sharp enough to cut glass. I had paid my own tuition. I had earned every rank on my collar, and for the last decade, I had been sending money home, tens of thousands of dollars funneled through an anonymous veterans grant that I had set up just to keep a roof over his head. He had cashed every check, probably spent it on Tyler's car payments, and then turned around to scream at me for being a financial burden. I looked at him, really looked at him, and the last vestige of filial guilt evaporated. He didn't want the money. If I wrote him a check for $250,000 right now, he wouldn't be happy. He would be furious. Because Richard didn't need a solvent daughter. He needed a failed one. He needed my failure to be the bedrock upon which he built the statue of his own ego. As long as I was the loser, he was the martyr who raised me. As long as I was beneath him, he felt tall. I'm not smiling, Dad, I said, my voice low and even. And the tab is closed. He blinked, confusion warring with rage. He opened his mouth to escalate, to threaten me right there in the aisle, but the PA system crackled to life. The ceremony was starting. He jabbed a finger in my face one last time, a warning, before turning his back to me to clap for the son he actually loved. I adjusted my stance, feet shoulder-width apart, hands clasped behind my back. He thought he was in control, because he was the loudest voice in the row. He forgot that in my line of work, the loudest one is usually the distraction. The real threat is the one you never hear coming. The ropes for the distinguished visitors section were thick, red velvet, suspended between polished brass stanchions. They were a physical line in the sand, separating the people who mattered from the people who watched. Richard stood as close to them as he could, without actually touching the fabric, vibrating with the need to cross over. He checked his watch, then checked mine, his eyes scanning the crowd for anyone important enough to impress. 5 minutes, he muttered. They should be seating the families now. He turned to Tyler, straightening my brother's collar with aggressive pride. You look sharp, son. Like a hero. Tyler nodded, his eyes sliding away from mine. He knew what was happening. He always knew. But Tyler had learned the same lesson I had, just from the other side of the equation. If you stay quiet, the predator eats someone else. Then Richard turned to me. The warmth vanished from his face, replaced by that familiar, sneering utility. He snapped his fingers. A sharp, percussive sound that cut through the low murmur of the crowd. "Here," he said, thrusting a heavy, designer tote bag into my chest. It belonged to Tyler's girlfriend, who was currently busy taking selfies by the stage. "And take these." He shoved 3 empty metal water bottles into my hands, the metal clanking against my rings. I stood there, arms full of other people's baggage, looking at him. "Well?" he barked. "Go fill them up at the fountain. Make yourself useful, Bella. Since you'll never be sitting in those VIP seats, you might as well serve the people who do. God knows you're used to fetching things in that trucking job of yours." He laughed. He actually laughed, looking around to see if the parents next to us were appreciating his wit. In that second, the heat in the amphitheater seemed to drop 20 degrees. I looked at Richard, and for the first time in 42 years, I didn't see a father. I didn't even see a bully. I saw a parasite. It hit me with the clarity of a satellite image resolving a target. This wasn't just cruelty. It was a survival mechanism. This was the scapegoat dynamic, in its purest, most toxic form. Richard didn't hate me. He consumed me. He looked at Tyler successful, handsome, lethal, and he felt small. He felt average. And a narcissist cannot survive feeling average. So he needed a counterweight. He needed a disaster to stand next to, so he could feel tall by comparison. I wasn't his daughter. I was his fuel. My failure was the battery that powered his ego. He needed me to be the screw-up so he could be the martyr who endured me. He needed me to be the water carrier so he could be the king. Every insult was just him feeding. The realization killed the last living cell of empathy I had for him. I wasn't angry anymore. You don't get angry at a tick for drinking blood, you just remove it. I said move, Richard snapped, stepping closer. Don't embarrass me. I looked at the water bottles. I looked at the heavy bag. I looked at the red velvet rope that he thought separated us. No, I said. Excuse me? His face reddened, the veins in his neck bulging. You do what I tell you. You owe me. I don't owe you a thing, I said, my voice flat and devoid of any emotion he could feed on. And I'm done carrying your baggage. I opened my hands. It wasn't a throw. It was a release. I simply stopped holding on to the things that weren't mine. The heavy tote bag hit the concrete with a dull thud. The metal water bottles clattered loudly, rolling across the pavement and coming to rest against his polished dress shoes. The sound was shocking in the pre-ceremony hush. Tyler's head snapped toward us. The girlfriend stopped taking selfies. The parents nearby went silent. Pick that up, Richard hissed, his voice shaking with a rage that bordered on panic. He was losing control of the asset. Pick it up right now, or I swear to God, Bella. Gravity, I said, stepping over the bag. It's a law of nature, Dad. Things fall when you stop holding them up. I didn't wait for his response. I turned my back on him, adjusting my blazer, and faced the stage. The PA system crackled. The band struck the first note. The operation was live. General Vance didn't walk to the podium. He occupied it. He was a 4-star general, a man whose career was written in the lines of a face that had seen things most people only watch in movies. The silence that fell over the amphitheater wasn't just respectful. It was absolute. Even the seagulls seemed to stop calling. Richard, however, was still muttering under his breath. Kicking the water bottles, I dropped back toward my feet, trying to regain some semblance of dominance in his small, angry universe. You're going to pay for this, he whispered, eyes fixed forward but venom directed sideways. Wait until we get home. Quiet, I said. I didn't look at him. My eyes were locked on Vance. The general began his speech. It was the standard address: duty, honor, the weight of the trident. He spoke of the sacrifices made in the dark so others could live in the light. His voice was gravel and authority, projecting to the back rows without effort. Then, mid-sentence, he stopped. It wasn't a pause for effect. It was a hard stop. He looked down at his notes, then looked up, scanning the crowd. His gaze swept over the front row. The senators, the admirals, the wealthy donors sitting in the cushioned VIP chairs. He didn't linger on them. His eyes moved higher, climbing the tiered seating, searching the sea of families and faces baking in the sun. He found me. He didn't smile. He didn't nod. He simply stepped away from the microphone. A ripple of confusion moved through the crowd. This wasn't in the program. Generals don't leave the podium, but Vance was walking down the steps of the stage, his boots hitting the wood with deliberate, rhythmic, heavy thuds. He bypassed the senator who half rose to shake his hand. He walked past the rope line. He started climbing the concrete stairs toward the general admission seating. The silence in the amphitheater changed texture. It went from respectful to confused, then to tense. People turned in their seats, craning their necks to see where the 4-star general was going. Richard noticed the shift. He sat up straighter, adjusting his tie. "He's coming this way," he whispered, his voice pitching up with sudden excitement. "He must know Tyler. I told you Tyler was special. He's coming to congratulate the family." He actually believed it. He preened, shooting a smug look at the family next to us, preparing his face for the honor he felt he was owed. He nudged me hard with his elbow. "Sit up straight," he hissed. "Don't embarrass your brother." Vance kept climbing. He was 20 feet away. 10. Richard stood up, his hand extended, a wide, ingratiating smile plastered on his face. "General, what an honor." Vance didn't even blink. He walked past Richard as if he were a ghost. He didn't break stride. He stopped directly in front of me. The air left the amphitheater. I stood up. I didn't stand like a tired sister or a disappointing daughter. I stood the way I had stood for 20 years in briefing rooms, from the Pentagon to the Situation Room. Shoulders back. Spine steel. Chin level. Vance looked me in the eye. The connection was instant, a shared language of clearance levels and classified wins. Then, slowly, deliberately, he raised his right hand to the brim of his cover. He held the salute. It wasn't a casual greeting. It was a formal rendering of honors. "Rear Admiral," Vance said, his voice carrying in the dead silence. "We were told you were deployed. We didn't think you'd come." I returned the salute, crisp and sharp, cutting the air. "General, it's my brother's graduation. I wouldn't miss it." The title hung in the air like a detonation. Rear Admiral. Behind Vance, down in the pit, the graduating class of SEALs, 200 of the deadliest men on the planet, saw the salute. They saw who was receiving it, and in one fluid motion, like a wave crashing backward, they stood up. They snapped to attention. They weren't saluting the general. They were saluting the Director of Naval Intelligence. I held the salute for a heartbeat longer, letting the image burn into the retinas of everyone present, before cutting it. Vance lowered his hand. "We have a seat for you, ma'am," he said, gesturing to the front row, next to the Secretary of Defense. I looked down. Richard was frozen. His hand was still half extended, hovering in the empty air where the general hadn't been. His mouth was open, but no sound was coming out. He looked like a man trying to solve a physics equation that proved gravity didn't exist. The water bottle he had been clutching slipped from his fingers and hit the concrete with a loud clack. I stepped out of the row. I didn't squeeze past him. He shrank back, stumbling over his own feet to get out of my way, his eyes wide and terrified, fixed on my face as if seeing a stranger. I paused at the velvet rope, the barrier he had worshipped, the line he had used to measure my worthlessness. I unhooked it myself. "You coming, General?" I asked. "After you, Admiral," he replied. I walked through the rope, leaving the heat, the crowd, and the man who called me a failure behind in the dust. I didn't look back. You don't look back at the wreckage when you're the one flying the plane. The ceremony ended in a blur of handshakes and deference. The same senators who hadn't looked twice at me an hour ago were now lining up to offer congratulations, their smiles tight with the realization that they had ignored a Director of Intelligence. I navigated the reception line with practiced efficiency, accepting the praise without letting it touch me. It wasn't for me, anyway. It was for the stars on my collar. As we reached the SUV, General Vance informed me that secure transport was waiting. 2 MPs flanked us, and for the first time, I felt the tension ease. I reached for the door, then a body slammed into the hood. It was Richard. He had forced his way through the crowd, face purple with rage, screaming that I had humiliated him. The MPs moved instantly, but he waved them off and grabbed my wrist, hard,